Happy Mother's Day. Let me begin wildly off topic real quick. But if you were thinking about greatness and the greatest of a particular sport or something, like a key figure, and I said something like basketball, like who comes to mind? Okay, good. Thank you. I was hoping there weren't any LJs out there. All right, my generation. Michael Jordan, if you're thinking about greatness. What about football? Who comes to your mind? Jerry Rice. Maybe nowadays, because of all the accomplishment, Tom Brady or someone like that. There's somebody who, when you think of something, a key figure, someone that represents something, that just sums it up in greatness. When you think of the Old Testament, or some events in the Old Testament, and you think of someone that looms large and stands above all the rest, there's probably a couple that come to mind, but go ahead, share. When you think of events in the Old Testament and the great figures of the Old Testament, who comes to mind? Moses, right? And there might be a couple other, David. But Moses definitely comes to mind when you think about the greatness of the Old Testament. If you're over, if you're over the age of 50 or something, when you think of Moses, you connected with the Exodus, and you might instantly get a picture of Charlton Heston. Right? You already know, big, perfect beard flowing in the wind, arms outstretched. The Lord of hosts will do battle for us. And then the waters begin to ripple open from the 1950s movie, The Ten Commandments. Maybe if you're under 50, you might begin to hear Hans Zimmer's score and picture an animated Moses, hearing God's voice, "With this staff you shall do my wonders." And then he slams it down in the Red Sea, and it begins to split in that animated version, the Prince of Egypt, right? Come on, at least that's my image that I get, right? I'm more the animated Moses one than the Charlton Heston one. But here's the twist. Moses, when you think of the Exodus, you think of Moses. But the story of Moses doesn't begin with Moses. It doesn't begin with Moses. It begins in a different area, in a different place. Exodus 1 talks about the names of the sons of Israel who came down to Egypt. And then it lists 70 of them. And then there's a quick little callback here in verse 7. It says, "But the Israelites in the land of Egypt became very fruitful and prolific. They multiplied and grew exceedingly strong, and the land was filled with them." What is that calling back to? It's calling back to the very first chapter of the Bible, where God forms Adam and Eve, and he says, he blesses them, and he says, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth." And we begin right here at the very few verses of Exodus, realizing that God's blessings and God's promises are happening. God's people are flourishing. But also, by the time we're here in Exodus, we realize that there is a tension, that there is an enemy, that something is not right in the world, and something fights against God. And so quickly, the book of Exodus also begins with fear. Because it says a new Pharaoh who doesn't know Joseph, and obviously doesn't know God, begins to see the Hebrew people multiplying, flourishing, and he gets afraid. And there's fear. he says, well, man, they're becoming more numerous than us. And right? And so your imagination, especially the fearful imagination. Can we all resonate a little bit with fearful imaginations? Right? You guys know what that's like, right? Your 4-year-old child just bold-faced lies to you. And you start thinking how they're going to just be a rebel in life and turn out, maybe get addicted to drugs, become a criminal, and you know, and you start even maybe parenting from fear. You get afraid. You move into the future, and your fear grips you. And I know parents with little kids, and especially teenagers, begin to feel those pressures, right? You know what it's like to see something, and you know what it's like. They lied to you. It doesn't mean they're going to become a drug lord. And you don't now need to adjust everything in your parenting technique to keep them from being a drug lord. But we all know how that is. We get afraid. We project. We might even tell ourselves that it's reasonable. Fear sometimes does look reasonable. I mean, the king of Egypt is living in a time, let's be honest, the history in the ancient world is conquer or be conquered. And so really, the king is reasonable. Like, look at our people. They're starting to become more than us. War always happens. Oh my gosh, like they're going to conquer us. They're going to enslave, like, there's always a way that you can kind of justify and be reasonable with your fears. But the Pharaoh takes that fear and he begins to really act upon it. And fear becomes his policy, and it leads to oppression. But as he oppresses God's people, they continue to flourish. And as fear is policy, fear usually blinds you and leads you further into your fearful state, this motivation. Like fear takes you further. And so now in verse 15, the king of Egypt finds 2 Hebrew midwives, Shiphrah and Puah. And he goes to them and he says, hey, listen to this. This is the most powerful man in Egypt at the time. And he finds these 2 midwives. And he says, here's what I want you to do. When you go in and you help these Hebrew women, if it's a boy, I want you to kill it immediately. But you can let the girls live. But against this backdrop right here, against this fearful king and now trying to rule out of his fear and his concern, and now creating these mandates, something unexpected happens in the story that continues out of Exodus. And it's not about a mighty warrior. It's not about necessarily this immediate moment of a staff plunging down into a sea. There's a handful of quiet, courageous women who begin to step up at this time. Shiphrah and Puah, they have audience with the king who could just end their lives instantly, and he's looking at them and he is telling them exactly what to do. They are told to kill these little boys. And they have every reason to want to obey the king, right? They know that their lives are in the hands of the king. But we know that they also know God and trust God. And so what do these 2 women do at the very beginning of this story? They obey God and not Pharaoh. They protect life at a time when they're being told to destroy life. They outwit the Pharaoh because they're not doing what he's telling them to do. So he brings them back before him. Imagine, see, really put yourself in their shoes. Imagine now going back before Pharaoh, the one that has looked at you and told you exactly what to do, and you're not doing it. But they go back in, and there's this clever and outwittingness that they even do. They just say, like, well, I mean, the Hebrew women aren't like the Egyptian women. Like, they use their words and they figure out a way to cleverly, like, disarm Pharaoh, because really they're disobeying him, and what should happen is they should come in. Why aren't you doing it? And he should just, like, kill them. But they have a way in this moment to kind of outwit Pharaoh and just says, well, I mean, the Hebrew women are a little bit more, they have a little bit more vigorous vitality than the Egyptian women. So then it escalates, because the path of fear blinds you and takes you further. And Pharaoh can't have this. So now, in verse 22, he gives an order to all his people. If you see a little Hebrew boy being born, you are to throw them into the Nile. Again, you can let the girls live. And so now Pharaoh has gone further in his murderous plot. And the story progresses. Moses' mother, a daughter of Levi, she becomes pregnant and she gives birth to a son. And when she saw, in one translation right here, it says he was a fine child. But do you know, like, how the Hebrew reads? It reads exactly like it reads in the beginning of Genesis. Moses' mother saw that her child was good, just as God saw in the beginning of creation that it was good. Moses' mother realizes life is from God, and she sees and she knows that life is good. Moses' mother, again, knowing the threat towards herself, knowing the decree of the land, but she sees Moses and she sees that he is good, and she hides him, she protects him, she nourishes life. But it gets to a point where she knows that she is not going to be able to care and protect for him any longer. Imagine the feelings and the position that Moses' mother is in at this moment. But she's not going to be able to do it. And so she takes her 3-month-old son and she prepares a little basket, it says, but the word, these are very purposeful. There's a very specific Hebrew word that she prepares for her son, and it's only used one other time in the entire Old Testament, and it's a few chapters before in the story of Noah. Noah builds an ark, the ark of deliverance and protection against the chaos from the outside. And now you see here the only other usage of that word, that Moses' mother prepares an ark for her son that she knows that she's not going to be able to protect and care for. And so with faith and trust, knowing that she is totally limited in this circumstance, she places her son in it and pushes it among the Nile. She hides her baby, the baby that she can no longer protect. She is not abandoning her child, but she's doing the only thing she can do in this circumstance. She is trusting God. And at the beginning of Exodus, as we think of Moses and the way his life begins and his story unfolds, we're now met with another woman, a daughter of Pharaoh. Interestingly, providence, right? On the day that Moses' mother entrusts him to God and places him in the Nile, the Pharaoh's daughter happens to be down there at the Nile bathing. And she sees something. And she calls for it. She tells her maidservant to go get it. She sees this little basket. Hey, bring that to me. And she brings it and she opens it up. And it says she sees this baby crying. And it's followed by immediately she took pity for this baby. She felt something. Now, this is Pharaoh's daughter. She knows the decree of the land. She knows exactly who and what this baby is. She knows it's a Hebrew child. She knows the decree of the land. She knows what should happen. She's got it all, but she feels something. She knows something. Something I would argue that most of us deeply know just intuitively. Again, there's something special about life. And so Pharaoh's daughter, the daughter of the tyrant king who is decreeing all of these things, is deciding she is going to protect and save and call this child her own. She chooses life over fear, and obviously she chooses mercy over the decree her father has sent out. Interestingly, in this story, we're now met by another woman, or shall we say a little girl. See, if you maybe try to do the math and try to figure these things out, so sometimes we're met by Moses' sister. But I don't know where your imagination goes, but I would say it's probably more accurate for your imagination to go to a 6, 7, 8-year-old little girl who has been watching everything that's going on, who knows is old enough to know kind of what's going on, and has been around her mother and has watched everything that her mother has had to do. But it says in the narrative that as Moses' mother goes back, that little Miriam hangs around to see what's going to happen to her 3-month-old little brother. And again, at the beginning of the story of Moses, this great Old Testament hero, we're met with some midwives who show faith and courage. Moses' mother, who demonstrates just sheer faith and trust. Pharaoh's daughter, who exhibits just what it means to be human and respect life. And now, the cleverness of maybe a 6-year-old little girl who runs over. Hey, what you got there? Oh, that's a new little baby, right? Babies need milk. I know a wet nurse in the Hebrews that could maybe keep this baby alive. Little Miriam, with all of this cleverness, 6, 7, 8 years old, now acts as this little in-between and runs back. The Bible is filled with such amazing and wonderful and beautiful stories. But put yourself there right now as Moses' mother, trusting but filled with terror and grief and overwhelmed. And next thing you know, your little daughter comes bursting in. Hey, I don't even know how she would communicate that to her mother. Hey, come on down there. You're going to get your son back. What? And the next thing you know, Moses' mother is standing before Pharaoh's daughter, and Pharaoh's daughter is saying, hey, could you keep this baby alive? And look, for all your trouble, I'm going to pay you to do this. And so the story of the great Moses begins with this handful of women who quietly and subversively choose life, choose courage, and are doing all of these little things underneath the story. And now Moses is back with his mother, and she's being paid to raise him. Pharaoh is commanding death and moving further and further into it. He is telling everyone to throw little baby boys into the Nile, and it's his very own daughter who is drawing out life from the Nile. Oh, the irony. Oh, the way that God works subtly and quietly in those that we would almost always overlook, because that's what Pharaoh was doing from the very beginning. He knows, right? We know where power rests. Well, it rests in all of the young men. And so to ensure our future, we need to let the women live. They can't do anything. And God says, oh yeah? Okay. And there's a story about a Catholic social worker during World War II, Irina Sendler. And she was in Poland and risking everything to save Jewish babies and children during the time of World War II. And she knew if she was caught that she would be executed, but also if she got caught, she would have to watch all of the children that she was rescuing be executed as well, putting her life on the line, but she did it anyway. And referring to a little Jewish boy one time when she was asked, she says, I have no idea what kind of man this boy will become, but I do know that God gave him life, and I will not let fear take it away. Well, that particular boy, he survived and he grew up and he became a doctor. And he saved hundreds of lives. And every time he was asked why he became a doctor, he would say, because a woman once saved me when I couldn't save myself. See, that's the power to choose life. Moses doesn't become anything on his own. The great magisterial figure in the Old Testament that is referred to more times in the Old Testament than any other figure was at a place where he could do absolutely nothing for himself. And it was the quiet, courageous, faithful actions of others. When we speak of the Exodus, I want you to remember always that we don't just remember a man with a staff, whether with a silvery flowing beard or Hans Zimmer's score behind him, but we remember midwives who trusted God and obeyed God more than Pharaoh. We remember a mother who let go of everything most precious to her, trusting in God. A daughter of Pharaoh who chose compassion in life. Remember a child who dared to be clever and speak up. A little child walking up to the daughter of the Pharaoh and offering her little opinion. But it's a God who never stops working through ordinary, quiet events, situations, and people. The Bible is filled with stories where God's power is most often found among those the world considers powerless. Women in the shadows, or maybe a little boy with a slingshot, a baby in a basket, or a carpenter nailed to a cross, humiliated, embarrassed, shamed, killed, crucified. Man, we always look for kings with swords, with power, with armies. But God sends shepherds, servants, midwives, sons, and daughters. The gospel flips the world upside down. Mercy becomes might. Humility is that which is honored. And surrender is the way to victory. God chooses what is weak to shame the strong, 1 Corinthians says. And again we see his power revealed not in the thrones that so many seek, but in cradles and crosses. God chooses the overlooked, the underestimated, the underqualified, because his strength is made perfect in weakness. God works in ways we so often forget. Mother's Day. As we honor the strength of mothers and women, we also remember that God's deliverance often begins in the most unlikely of places. The places we don't look, but the places where small little acts of faith and courage, acts that have at their motive protecting, honoring, nurturing life. Life is God's gift. And I'll tell you this, God is the God of life. Like Moses, not one of us in here draws ourself out of the water. But others have played every part. And so today, whether you're a parent, a mother, a father, maybe you're trusting God with your children. Maybe you're just a single woman standing up in a very hard place. Maybe you're a man wrestling with a lot of fear, or maybe you're a young person, a teenager, and you're trying to be brave in your own little small corner hidden. I encourage you to take heart, because God still uses unexpected people to do extraordinary things. Pharaohs will always fall, and life will always triumph. Let's pray. Lord, we just stand amazed at the way that you work, the way that you have always worked, and the way that you will continue to work. You can use small moments of courage and faith and trust, motives to preserve and nourish life. You move powerfully in those moments. Lord, and I pray that everyone here be reminded and encouraged that none of their little moments of faith, none of their behind-the-scenes actions that nobody knows are ever taken for granted. But we all participate. We all participate as the community of faith in those that rise up and do great things for you. Lord, it really does take the community of God's people to see your kingdom flourish. And I pray that we all continue to participate in that through faith and trust in Jesus Christ. Amen.